Hilchas Roim Perik Revi. Now in Perik Gimel we learned about if you have a field and you want to make archaka between two minim, what's the share of the archaka between two minim of tvua, two minim of yirakis? We also learned about a shura next to a field. If you have a field of yirakis and next to it you want to make a shura of different type of zroim. Here we're talking about not fields. We're talking about zroim. How much the archaka has to be between a shura or just plain zroim without a field. Perik Revi. Mutal Izreya shtei shures zu b'tzad zu shel kishuyim u'shtei shures b'tzidon shel diluyim u'shtei shures shel pula mitzri. So you have 2 rows of zucchini, 2 rows of squash, and 2 rows of beans of pula mitzri. And v'telem ben kol minumin. Now a telem means a furrow. Mine says earlier in halacha, in Perek Gimel halacha Yud Beis, the Rambam was speaking about the shear of the harchaka between a field and a shura of yerek mimin acher. So over there he says it's enough to have a telem echad, which is arke shisha tvachim v'rachbe ka'amke. So you have a field and then you have another shura, and between the two you just have a telem, which is arke shisha tvachim and rachbe ka'amke. In halacha Yud Gimel again, the Rambam mentions B'negea 2 shuris, and over there he says, Sedai Elias b'neim telem echad. Over there he doesn't write the telem echad arke of shisha tvachim. Could be that's what he means, the pashtos. But he says k'mei sheyizbar, and yizbar means over here. So it's not so clear. I mean, over here the Lashon Rambam is that you should have a telem ben kol minumin. So the Rambam Aruch names on the pashtos, and he brings from the Rikorkis that telem means over here a telem which is only Aruch 6 tvachim. So in other words, you have 2 shuris of one min, 2 shuris of another min, and they're really pretty much next to each other. It's just that in between there's a furrow which is 6 tvachim long, and rachbe ka'arke, and I suppose they become closer. They maybe don't come mamish next to each other. They just become closer to each other, like we learned before. It's not 100% clear that that's the pashta taich of the word telem, because it sounds like the telem being kol minu min means that telem goes through the entire width, just like before we learned that there was a shear of shisha tvachim, which also goes through the entire width. So I'm not really sure. But I'm just saying that the Rambam Aruch certainly teaches, and he brings from the Rikorkis, from next halacha, that over here it means a telem only of 6 tvachim. So again, mutal izreya shtei shuris zu b'tzazu shel kishuyim, u'shtei shuris b'tzidon shel diluyim, u'shtei shuris shel pula mitzri. And what's dividing these different species, the 2 shuris of each, is v'telem ben kol minumin. Aval leyizra shura acha shel kishuyim, v'shura acha shel diluyim, v'shura acha shel pula mitzri. Aval pi shahatelem mavdil ben kol minumin. Why? Mipnei sheminim elu olim shalahem aruchim v'nimshachim u'mistapchim. These particular minim, their leaves are long, and they're going to get mixed up with each other. And therefore, v'mzoran shurim b'shat shura is yisarev akel v'niru k'nezroim barvuvya. So these particular zroim, you can't do a shura and a shura. Whereas other zroim, you'd be able to do a shura as well. I'm saying in these particular zroim, since they are alam are aruchim, so therefore you could only do it if there's 2 shuras, and 2 shuras. So then it's not nira kirvuvya. Halacha beis hoisa sadeu zrua min mimina yirakis ubikesh lizreya bitecha shuris shel diluyim. You have a field that has a different, let's say, onions in the field, and you want to plant in this field shuris of diluyim, of squash. Is oiker min hayerek makim shizreya beshuris shel diluyim. So you uproot another an area in the field where you could make an entire row of diluyim of squash. Umavdil beino bein hayerek betelem, and there's a telem separating this shura where you're going to be planting the squash and the rest of the field from both sides. Umaniach, so then you could plant the diluyim over there. So in other words, you create an area in the field where you have enough room for the diluyim plus the telem on both sides. Now you want to do many shuras. You don't want to do just one shura. So you want to do a shura in a different part of the field. So you have to miniach min hayerek reichiv shtei mesriyama. So you leave the original yerokas that were there in the field. You leave 12 amas, and then v'oisa shura shnir shel dluim. Again, over there you uproot again. Umavdul beino ben hayerek betelim, and again you have a telim in between that shura shel dluim and the other yerokas. What are the field? V'chein ad makom shir. So you can do as many as you want. Shenimtza ben kol shtei shura shel dluim shtei mesriyama. So it's going to come out that you're going to have a field, whatever the field is made of yerokas. And in that field, you're going to have rows of diluyim in the field, but the rows of the diluyim between one row and the other row is going to be 12 amas of the other yerokas, plus obviously the telem, which is in between the row of the diluyim and the other yerokas. That's how it'll be every 12 amas. So memela they won't mix up. Aval pachas mikan, also why? Nei sha'olin shemistapchem mikan and mikan b'yerek shebineim. V'nira hakel ki'ilu nizra birvuvia. So again, since we're dealing with diluyim, and diluyim is something which have large leaves, and therefore they could get mixed up with each other, so there's a concern that the diluyim of one row and the diluyim of the other row will somehow or another join together, and they'll overlap the yerokas, so it'll look like a nirvuvia. So therefore you want that the diluyim on one side and the diluyim on the other side should be very far from each other, should be 12 amas away from each other. So therefore they shouldn't have any connection, and therefore the field won't look like it's be'ervuvia. Okay. So again, so we learned a din of planting 2 shuras of dalas, and two shuras of dalas, and 2 shuras of kishuyim and pulamitzi next to each other. So you have to have so over there has to be 2 shuras instead of 1 shura. Masha'inkin, over here we're learning if a situation where a person wants to plant a shura of dalas in his field, and then to plant another shura of dalas, so the second shura should be 12 amas away from the first shura. Halacha gimel, hoisa shura shel dalas ruah, afilu dalas yechidus. It was already planted, this squash. Uvol is rea betzida tvua, is marchik beis reva. So you have to have a separation of beis reva, which is 10 amas and a fifth, plus by 10 amas and a fifth. That should be the area of separation between where you're planting tvua and to where the dalas was originally there. Shaharei nimshecho aleha ve'chazika makom gadol. Even though we're dealing with 1 shura or even 1 dalas, but since its leaves spread, so it's considered like it established a place. So it's like a soda. Ve'chazika makom gadol v'chol davar sheyeh b'tech beis reva shemarchikim min shnei aminim. This beis reva which you're separating between the dalas and the tvua, anything could be there. Eilam and amida, kigana kever, vaselo, kietzeben. That whatever it is, as long as there's a separation of part that's not grown with the dalas and not with the tvua, so it's also beseder. It's a kever, vaselo, kietzeben. I don't know. I'm not sure why the Rambam Mitamol over here said this din. We mentioned before earlier about this beis reva, the separation beis reva. I suppose over there we were talking about a field, so we assume that it's just a field. You're leaving an empty space in the field. Over here you had a dalas, and on the side you're planting tvua. So we say as long as there's a beis reva separating the dalas and the tvua that you're going to plant, is beseder. Now earlier we learned in Perek Yud Gimel that if you have a field of tvua and now you want to plant in this field dalas, so you have to be marchik shisha tvachim. You only had to be marchik shisha tvachim. You know, you could have a field of tvua, and in that field of tvua you could plant a row of dalas, and all you have to do is be marchik shisha tvachim. Over here you're having a dalas, and now you want to plant tvua next to it. So we're saying you need a beis reva to separate between the tvua and the dalas. So the explanation is over there we started with tvua, now you're planting the dalas. So for that is enough 6 tvachim. But over here it's fakert, you started with the dalas. So the dalas is established itself already. And now you want to plant tvua betzidos, so then the din is you need a beis reva to separate the two. Halacha daled. Hatelem, a furrow, which has a depth. Amas hamayim sheim amukim tefach, which they're deeper tefach, is zeidem l'techa shleisha min Yisroel. Echad al svas hatelem mikan, ve'echad mikan, ve'echad be'emtza. So in other words, one on the edge, in other words, the part that's not inside the telem, not inside the amas hamayim, on the edge which is lifted up a bit in regards to the part that's in the telem or in the Amos Hamayim. So over there it could be Zireya one min, on the other side another min, and on the bottom in the telem itself you could be Zireya another min. In other words, the point is over here is that as long as it's obvious that they're separated from each other, because one is on one side of the telem, one is the other side of the telem, and the other one's inside the telem, so Memela says it's not a problem. And also, halacha hey, even in one hole. There's obviously, certainly if it's next to each other, but even if they're in one hole. Over here we're talking about things that, zucchini and squash, which are all things that have large leaves. Even they're planted near each other in the same guma, but nevertheless, as long as it's planted in a manner that one should be tilted towards one side, and the other one should be tilted towards the other side, towards opposite sides of this guma, so that's fine. He said first 2 minim. Even if you have 4 minim in one guma, he said, and it's very clear that each one is tilted towards another side of the guma, that's also harez mutter. So the point over here is that even though they're close to each other, but nevertheless, since they're obviously separated because they're tilted to different sides of the guma, there's no concern. There's no concern. Even when we're dealing with kishas and glass, which are dealing with things that have large leaves and they could look like they're mixed up. Halacha vav. Hareitza lizreya sodeu meisher mikol minomin. Now we're going to learn about there's meisher and there's a karachas. And the Rambam is going to say a meisher is something that's rectangular. And a karachas is something which is square. That's the difference. Now a meisher is, the width of the meisher can't be less than 6 tvachim. But on the other end, it could also not be wider than the width of a base reva, which is eser amas v'chemish. It can't be wider than that. If it's wider than that, it doesn't go into the together of a meisher. Then it goes into the together of a field. So there's a meisher. A meisher is something rectangular. It doesn't make a difference how long it is. It can't be wider. It has to be at least 6 tvachim wide, and it cannot be wider than 10 tvachim and a fifth. If it's wider than that, then it goes into the together of a field. And a karachas, we're going to learn, is something which is square. Nachamal. Zareya l'sreya sodeu meisher mikol min. He wants to create rectangular areas in his field for different minim. So what he has to do is markik ben kol meisher or meisher shtei amas or shtei amas. There has to be an empty area between each meisher of 2 amas, and at one point in the meisher, and then umeitzer v'helech, and then it becomes closer and closer to each other. Actually, sure be named b'seif hameisher ela kolshu sharei nirin shalei nizru be'ervuvia. So as long as there's an area between the 2 amas, these 2 meishers, which is 2 amas by 2 amas, an empty area. So mainly you see that they're separate entities. So even though later on in the extension of this meisher, the meisher could be, let's say, 100 amas long, and the extension of the meisher, they become closer and closer to each other. But as long as in one point there's an area which is 2 amas by 2 amas, which separates these two areas, these 2 rectangular shapes, so there's no concern that they don't. So it's obviously that they are not nizru b'irvuvia. That's been a geya reitza lasis sadeu meisher. So the eitzah is to have an area of 2 amas by 2 amas, which is empty in between the meisher, and then the rest of the meisher they could become closer to each other. Halacha zayin rotza lasis sadeu korachas mikol minomin. Now we learned there's a meisher and there's a korachas. A meisher is rectangular, as we'll soon say, and korachas is square. So you want to make different little square areas in your field of different minim. So liyasa b'kol beiso b'teich kol beiso yeser al teisha korches, and kol korachas mem beis reva. So if you have a beiso and you want to make in this beiso little square areas that have different minim, so you could make within each beiso you could make 9 square areas, which each one of those square areas is going to be beis reva. And v'nimsa, once you do that, if you have 9 base revas in this area of a beisah, is nimsa rochi ben korachas v'korachas korev le'eser amis pachas revia shekol beisah chamishim al chamishim. So the cheshbon is like this: you have a beisah means 50 amas by 50 amas. Now, if you divide 50 amas by 50 amas, and you divide it into 5, and those 5 little squares across and 5 little squares down, so it comes out you're going to have together 25. You're going to have 25 areas. It doesn't have to be exact. The 25 are not going to be exact sizes, but you'll have 25 areas. Now, if they're going to would be exact sizes, so then each would be less than a beis reva, because there's 24 beis revas in a beisah. A reva is a reva kav. There's 6 kavim in a saw, so there's 4 revas in a kav. So there's 24 beis revas in a beisah. So if you're going to divide this beisah into 25 little boxes, so each one is going to be less than a beis reva. Mashenk, those little boxes aren't going to be able to be equal. They're not going to be equal boxes. So let's imagine if you have, let's say, you have 5 rows across. You have 5 rows. Both ways you have 5 rows. So if you, let's say you have, on the top row you'll have 5 boxes, on the middle row you'll have 5 boxes, and on the bottom row you have 5 boxes. And on the top row, from the 5 boxes, you have the one on the outside, on both outside ones, and the one in the middle, you have something there. You have you plant over there. And al derezeh, in the middle row, you have the outside box and the other outside box in the middle one, and al derezeh at the bottom. So you have 5 rows. The top row, you have 3 of them filled. The bottom row, you have 3 of them filled, and the middle row, you have 3 of them filled. So Mele is going to come out between each one that has zroim. There's going to be next to it. It won't be next to anything else that has zroim. There'll always be a box in between. So now the eitzah is going to be that the squares that you plant in, will be a beis reva, and the squares which are going to be separating one beis reva and the other beis reva is going to be a little less than a beis reva. It's going to be, and as a beis reva is 10 amas and a fifth by 10 amas and a fifth. So over here, you're going to have the areas that are planted at 10 amas by a fifth and 10 amas by a fifth. And the areas which are separating the areas which were planted will be a little less than that. They will be 10 amas, in other words, 9 amas and 3/4 by 9 amas and 3/4 be'erach. And memela, that'll be the area in between the karchis, and that'll be fine. So b'kitzur, you have a beisah. In the beisah, you divide into 25 squares. Those 25 squares aren't equal squares. Then 9 of those 25 squares, the separated 9, you plant mini zroim harbi. In between them, you have an area, another square, which separates it from wherever else. It separates it from both sides. In other words, it's never next to anything else that's planted. And those areas that are separating are smaller than a beis reva. They are 9 3/4 by 9 3/4, as opposed to the part that was planted, which is 10 1/5 by 10 1/5. That's what he's saying. Halacha ches. Uma bin hamesher lekarachas, shamesher oruch v'karachas mirubas. Halacha tes. Mina yirokes, she'ein dereb bnei yodam lezreya mem elamat mi'at k'mesher b'yanus. At the end of Perek Aleph, the Rambam was telling us about the different types of zroim. So he spoke about that there's zerei negina, which darkam lezreya mem sodas, and they are called mina zroim. And then there is zerei negina, which are zereinim, which are not really edible. We're talking about zereinim which are not edible, which the derech is not to plant sodis, but rather only small patches, and they are called mina yerokas. So there were 2 names. There was something called mina zeroim and something called mina yerokas. Now here the Rambam is referring to that name, mina yerokas. It's that the word that he used at the end of Perek Aleph. Mina yerokas, she'ein dereb bnei odom lizreya mehem ela ma'at ma'at k'mei shebiyarnu at the end of Perek Aleph, is muter lizreya mehem afilu chamisha minim b'teich aruga acha shisha tvachim al shisha tvachim. If you have an aruga, which is shisha tvachim al shisha tvachim, it's possible to plant 5 minim in this aruga. V'hu sheyizra arba minim ba'arba ruchis aruga. The 4 of those minim will be on the 4 sides of the aruga, and v'echad b'amtza, and you'll have another min in the middle of this aruga. And v'yarchik ben kol min u'min. So there should be a tefach u'marza separating between the minim that they shouldn't be next to each other. There should be an area of a tefach umachza which separate the two minim. Kedei shelayin kuzamiza. Avul yeser al chamisha minim leizra. Afal pisha marchik b'neim. V'sheminim harbe baruga gazu arein kinutuyim barvuvim. So, b'kitzer, so in an aruga which is 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim, it's a possibility to plant 4 different species, 4 on the 4 sides of the aruga, plus 1 in the middle, but on the condition that there should be a tefach umachza, shouldn't be next to each other by a tefach umachza, because then they will be yoinkim from each other, and that would be a problem. Now this din that you have to have, that you can have actually 5 minim in one aruga, and as long as there's a harchaka of a tefach umachza, that there shouldn't be a yanika, we learned earlier that it's a possibility that, for example, the reish teir, if you know, if the angle, if the spitz of a field meets with the spitz of another field, you know, the angles meet, so then that would also be fine, because it's obvious that it's 2 separate minim. Now, if one field is, let's say, a square, and the edge of the square, the angle of the square, the corner of the square, meets the side of another square, that would also be fine. And certainly if it meets the corner of another square, they meet each other. So over here also, the question is, if within this aruga you're making 5 minim, and you're putting it in a way that, let's say, the middle min that you're doing would touch the zroim on the side, but they wouldn't touch it like direct. They would touch it, you'd make a square within the aruga. You have 4 on the sides of the aruga, and each 4 touch each other on the other. You have the let's say the east side and the south side meet each other, but they meet each other on their angles. They meet each other on their angles. In other words, there's a square, open square at the end, and therefore they meet each other in their angles. So they're touching each other, but they're touching each other not a flat touching, but rather only the corner. The corner of the end of one is touching the corner of the end of the other. And al derech zeh, if you have in the middle a square, and the square is like a square in such a way that the corner of the square is touching each one of the 4 sides, but it's touching each one of the 4 sides with its corner. Would that be permissible or not? So that's a big machlek rishonim, whether that would be permissible. Over here, the Rambam doesn't say all these possibilities. The Rambam just says you could plant 4 minim, as long as there's a tefach umachza in between those 4 minim, 5 minim rather, on all 4 sides, and 1 in the middle, as long as there's a tefach umachza in between them. But more than that, more than 5 minim, you shouldn't, because there'll be a revuvia, which obviously means even if there is a tefach umachza in between. I'll call upon. Halacha Yud, Bamedvar Mamurim Ba'aruga Shi B'churva. There's an aruga which is, we're only having this aruga here, and there's nothing around this aruga. It's in a place where everything's desolate. Ve'en shom zera chutzala. Aval aruga bein arugas. So there's other things going on in other arugas. Is also l'zreya b'chamisha minim. Shem yizrach im yizrach b'chol ruach me'aruga zu, u'b'chol ruach me'arugiseh shesviviseh, is yiroah kel k'morim. So it'll look like everything's sumished, because there's different arugas which are touching each other. However, v'mhita olin shebaruga zu lekan, v'olin shebaruga shebetzida mikan. So know that each one is tilted in a different direction. Each one is tilted towards its own aruga, not outwards but inwards. Achi yirol muvdalim is mutter. V'chein mosa telam mikol aruga v'aruga is also mutter, because there's a telam between the aruga. A telam over here, a telam definitely is enough 6 tvachim, because the whole aruga is enough 6 tvachim. So if you made a telam between each aruga, so that's also the same. Halacha Yudalef. V'also l'zreya chutz la'aruga b'lei telam b'lei netiyah. Just to plant something outside the aruga, without a telam separating what you're planting and the aruga, and without making this netiyah of tilting it towards a different direction, would be asur. Va'afilu kineged hakronis shel aruga she'ein bazera. In other words, we're talking about an aruga that you planted 5 minim on the 4 sides of the aruga. You planted each one a min, but the corner of the aruga was left empty, because that was the separation between the min of each side. In other words, you had 4 on 4 sides. You planted each one a separate min, but in the corner you left empty in order there should be a separation of a tefach mechza between each min, so the corners were left empty. Now you want to plant another species outside that corner. So l'chura outside that corner is empty, an empty area. So why shouldn't you be able to do it? So on that he says no, because gzeira shema yizba arba aminim ba'arba zavis aruga. You're able to plant four minim on the four sides of the aruga. You have another choice really. You could plant the four minim in the four corners of the aruga and leave the sides empty. In other words, you could have the corner. You have each corner, an area where you plant, and in between, and the wall of the aruga, so to speak, you leave a tefach machza between each species, and that wall is, so to speak, empty, and the kronis are the ones that are filled with the four, and the fifth you put in the middle. So therefore, gzeira shem yizra arba minim ba'arba zavis aruga, and then v'yizra minim acherim chutzila keneged hazavis. So therefore, they made a gzeira that you shouldn't be able to plant a different species even outside the corners which are empty, because sometimes the corner may be full. Halacha Yud Beis. Now, hoiso haruga shisha, and v'hoyelo gvul govea tefach v'rachav tefach. In other words, you have over here around this aruga, you also have like a certain border, and that border was a tefach tall and a tefach wide, savav. So now you have an aruga which is 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim, which is surrounded with a border which is a tefach tall and a tefach wide. So as mutal is re'aba afilu shmeina es aser minim. So in this area, in this aruga, which has 6 tvachim by 6 tvachim and a border which is a tefach tall and a tefach wide, you could end up planting 18 minim. What's the cheshma 18? Shloisha al kol gvul gvul. On each side is 3. And in each one of the 3, and also with a tefach and mechza separation in between, obviously, because you have 3, so you could plant. You have a tefach and mechza, tefach and mechza, tefach and mechza. So that's 3 tvachim, and the other 3 tvachim are planted with different minim, and v'shisha b'amtza, and another 6 in the middle. Now over here, normally we said before when there wasn't a border, you could only have 5. And here, because there's a border around, so it's not so visible, that's what Teis Yontif says. So therefore you can plant 6, it's hard to understand. But that's what we're saying over here. Over here you have a border around, so on each side of the border you're planting 3 different species. And inside you're planting another 6 species rather than 5. And v'yarchik ben kol minu min tefach u'mechza. But still this din, that between each min there should be a tefach u'mechza separation, still remains. And also over here is v'la yizra reish halefes b'teich ha'gvul. And this gvul, which you're planting on the gvul, you're planting 3 minim, and mainly ending up having 12 minim on the gvul. Those are 3 on each side. So on that you shouldn't plant a reish halefes, because shemi yimaleo. Maybe that reish halefes is something which also spreads very strong, very big leaves. So in Mela, so that you shouldn't do shemi yimaleo. But Yisrael le Yisrael. You shouldn't do more than 18. You have to understand. I mean, all of a sudden the Rambam is speaking on a problem with a reish halefes. Whereas before we were talking about there was a problem of diluyim and kishuyim. Now we're saying there's a problem of a reish halefes, and this reish halefes is a problem only b'teich hagvul. V'yizra reish halefes b'teich hagvul. This gvul, which you're planting 12, or in other words, you're planting around 12. It's like 6 inside and 12 on the outside. So it comes out altogether 18. So over here there's a concern of a reish halefes. Halacha Yud Gimel. Now we spoke about that you could do mina yerakis. Mina yerakis meant things which are normally not grown as fields, but only grown as patches. So Mimela is mechatchila clear that you're only planting a patch of it. However, says the Rambam, v'aser lizreya ba'aruga min izroim b'nizah. Min izroim meant those zroim which are normally planted as fields. That's what the Rambam teaches at the end of Perek Aleph. Mipnei shehein nirin kilayim, because they look like kilayim, because since they're normally planted as fields, so they are near kilayim. But min yirak is hail v'derab ne'odem l'zreim and ma'at is a reason mutek meshabiyanu. Things which are normally planted as fields seem to be more kilayim. Mashenkin, things that are normally planted separate are not so kilayim. You have to maybe understand it a little bit better to understand something that's normally planted as a field, so when you're planting it, it looks like more Kilayim. Ashenkin, if it's not normally planted as a field, it's not so much Kilayim. Halacha Yudalit, Gvul Sheyagavei Tefach, V'zoru Bei Minam Harbe K'mei Biyarnu, which you are allowed to, and then V'nismayit Mitefach Me'achar Shenizrabei, Kosher Sheyag Kosher Mitchilasi. The fact that right now this Tefach went down, somehow or another the karka sunk a little bit, so that's not a problem. As long as l'chatchil, when you planted 12 minim around this area, and it was a tefach tall, so that's beseder. Halacha tezvav hareitze lemalis kol ginose mina yirokas rabin, aber v'lei yarchik benem, he doesn't want to lose any space. As the Eitzah says, Eisa kol agina arugis merubois. He makes the entire Guinea, divides it into square aruges, afilu shisha al shisha. And then, v'oise b'chol aruga chamishi igulim, he makes 5 circles in each aruga, arba ba'arba ruchisa, 4 on the 4 sides of the aruga. In other words, he makes a circle on the side, on the wall, in other words, next to the wall, on the 4 sides. And also, ve'echad be'amti, he makes another circle in between those 4 circles. So he has 5 circles. Then, v'zeirea b'chol min b'chol eagle, in each circle he plants a different species. And also, now he made the 4 circles on the 4 sides, but the corners are still empty. So on the corner he can make a square, and over there, v'zirei arba mina machedim ba'arba karnas aruga. He makes 4 squares on the corners, and in between those, the squares of the corners, you have the circles which are on the side next to the wall of the aruga, and then you have the circle in the middle. So you have 5 circles plus 4 squares. So you plant the 5 circles, then you also plant the 4 little squares which are on the corners. So now you have nimtza tisha mina b'chol aruga. You have 9 species in this aruga. Ve'inir muvdolzim is that they seem completely separated, because you could obviously see this is the part of this circle, this is part of this circle. Ve'eni mafsid ela mashe bein ha'igulim bilvad. Shehu manichi charav, the parts between the circles he leaves empty. Kedei she'iro ha'igulim muvdolim and akronis muvdolim mizeh mizeh. In order to be obvious where the circles are and where the corners are, and which circle is separated from the other circle, you have to have that little space in between the circles and in between the circle and the squares. He absolutely didn't want to lose any space at all. So then, if they were planted vertically, in one direction, is should be named Erev. So the planting that they have in between the circles, he plants it in a different direction. He plants it horizontally, so to speak. The Emhoya is really made of it. Should be named Shesi. As long as you can have an area which is completely covered with all different types of species, and nevertheless they will be considered separated. So B'kitzur, you could end up having an aruga. So I'm saying you have an aruga which will have 9 different species in the aruga, because you have 5 circles and 4 corners, and that area will be completely beseder. There won't be a problem. Halacha tezayin. Mikol elu advarim nizbor lecha shebizman sheyesh bein shnei aminim harchoka ru'uy lem kedei sheyinku zeh mizeh is ein cheshel marasayin. That's what we learned in Perek Gimel Halacha Yudalet, when you were marchik the harchoka haru'uya, and then there was notza the tvua la tvua yerek ala yerek. We're not worried about it, because since you were hilchik kasher, it's not a problem. K'mesha b'yanu bizman sheyiro muvdalin zeh mizeh is ein cheshel yinikasam. So if you have them next to each other, over here in the case, over here you have the igulim, they're next to each other. But nevertheless, since they're obviously separated, so therefore there's no problem. There's no problem of the yanika. There's no problem of the yanika if they're nearer separated from each other. That's why we learned, Marshall, you plant 2 things in the same guma, but one is towards the other, or one is tilted towards one direction, the other one is tilted towards another direction. And that's not a problem. Al is over here, when you have one aruga and you're having 9 minim over here, so obviously they're next to each other. But since this is a circle and this is another circle, it's obviously they're 2 separate circles, and this is a square. So the fact that they're next to each other is not a problem.